So we just had a steady release of a couple of new war bands for Godtear. We got that leak. It looks like some sort of centaur hybrid elven war band that's going to be released soon. So I'm passionate. I'm excited about that. And the support of the community has been amazing. So jumping into Godtear, I wanted to share with you why I really love this system and what has impressed me about this system to the point where I jumped all in. I was very, very excited, and it has quickly risen to be one of my top favorite war games. It is up there with Warhammer 40,000, Battletech, X-Wing miniatures. It's a staple of my wargaming diet, and it really kind of took me by surprise because not only was it very easy to fall in love with the visuals and the narrative, there are some unique aspects to the rules that, as of right now, do not exist in any other war games because there are no legacy aspects holding things over. And that's what I think makes this system so amazing and so dynamic. Now, we're going to compare it with Warhammer 40,000 as an example. We have a legacy system, a legacy wargaming system like Warhammer 40,000, which I also enjoy and I'm passionate about. It's been around for a long time. It has evolved. There are multiple editions, but as it has evolved, certainly new armies and factions have been added. Certainly new weapons and war gear and rules have been added. But at its core, it's still that 1980s wargaming type system. It's still that minimal interrupt, you go, I go, and comparing damage and based on a D6 system. Now, they've changed it over the years. You have a D6 plus a D3. You've got exploding dice. You have different rules that can break things. But at its core, it's based on legacy aspects. A lot of war games that are out there and well-established and very popular, they're popular for a reason, they have these legacy aspects. And you run up to this question and say, if we break the game and we evolve the game, then do we lose that core base who say, this is not Warhammer 40,000? Here's an example. Warhammer Fantasy, Long Live the Old World. They destroyed that. Games Workshop destroyed that, launched Age of Sigmar. It took a while to gain some traction. It's very popular now. That was a complete rules reset. That was them saying, we're taking this 80s legacy rule set, we're letting it go. And that was a big adjustment for a lot of players. We gained a lot of players. We lost a lot of players. On the role-playing side, I mean, this happens. Dungeons & Dragons 4.0, I've gone on record saying I like 4.0 for some aspects. That was such a radically different version of D&D that the company was basically like, we're coming out with the new edition as fast as we can, and we're going to fix everything. Because the community said this is just too radical of a break. We see this. So you run the risk, if it's an already established wargaming system, if you change it too much, then you run into trouble with your player base, or their models aren't as effective, or their favorite units change. When you start a wargaming system, so now this comes into Godtear. They've got a concept. They've got a narrative, this idea that tears from the literal gods have fallen to the planet below, and champions are looking to consume these tears to rule the land below. And by consuming them, they've grown in power and they've attracted followers in different war bands and factions. And they all fight for different reasons. And there's a lore to it and a narrative. You've got this idea. And now you say, we're going to implement this in a game. And we don't have any legacy aspects. Like, we're literally going to build this from the ground up and take advantage of, at the time, 2018, 2019 gaming thinking and move from there. And this is what has impressed me. First of all, the fact that this was built from the ground up. It wasn't like, well, this other system was popular and let's just clone it and have this version. Or as a game designer, I've worked on these other systems back in the day, so naturally that's in my DNA, that's my genesis. I'm going to pull that in to the system. Like, no, this is like, let's just do this from the floor up. The first thing that impresses me the most, especially being a skirmish-based game, you are never out of the game. You are never removed from the game. You can never be killed from the game. So you're a champion, and you play with a warband. So you've got a champion, and a couple of different followers. Depends on the type of warband. You can play one warband versus one, two versus two, three versus three. We're going to talk about scalability in a moment. But your champion can never be killed. So when you've taken enough wounds and, quote, your champion's killed, next turn you have to spend action to revive them. I mean, look, they're literally infused with the salty tears of the gods. They're not going to die. Your followers, they can be killed, but then you can expend actions to bring followers back, recruit some more that are just over the hill, or you revive them. Now, this doesn't mean just your infinite summoning. I mean, there is management. You have certain select actions per turn. When you revive a champion, juice them back up, drink those salty tears, drink that healing potion, or you bring in followers, that means you have less activations that turn. So it's not without consequence. But this was the first thing that really got me excited, because old wargaming thinking is killy. I mean, this is essentially how you win Warhammer 40,000. I throw enough dice at your stuff before you can do anything, and you're wiped off the table. How can you win? Doesn't even matter what the mission is. So we see this especially in skirmish-based games, where if you have a fixed amount of models, if I can alpha strike you, or I can do something where you lose 4 or 5 team members, out of an 8-team member warband, there's no coming back from that. It's I won't say impossible. It's very, very hard. So right away, Godtear corrects that and says, you're never really out with your warband. You can come back, but it's resource management. It's going to cost you a little bit. So think about it and do your best rather than just being suicidal. So that got me pumped. That got me excited. The second aspect was the scoring system. A lot of legacy missions are essentially played over a number of turns, and the last turn of the game, whoever has the most objectives or has completed the most wins. So what this means is sometimes, based on a wargaming system, either through bad tactics or the luck of the dice or just list or army design on your opponent, if they can hurt you enough by turn 2 or turn 3, you're now at a point where you look and say, I really can't win this mission. I can't. I mean, we're going to play the game out. I'm a firm believer of we're always going to play the game out. Even if I'm losing turn 1, I know I'm going to lose. Never say never, because you never know. But even when you know never means never, out of respect for my opponent, look, we've taken time out of our lives, real life. Then, you know what? Let's fight it out. Let's do it. I'm not going to go baby cakes and just pout and say, well, I'm done playing. Sadly, this might be a vlog for another time. I've seen that. I've seen grown players, grown men, turn 1 or turn 2 get stomped for whatever reason, legit or not legit, and basically be like, I'm done, I'm out of here. And they pack up their models and they leave. And you're like, wait, we've got like 3 more hours to play. I mean, at that point when I see it, I'm like, dude, whoever, the player that's left, I'm like, just come over to my table and throw down your models and we'll adjust the mission, because we'll just make up the narrative, right? Reinforcements arrive and we'll get you in the game. Because what are you going to do? Stand around for another 2 hours with no one to play? So I'm a big fan of play it out no matter what, but I do realize that legacy systems, they screw you over in a lot of missions. Godtear was like, we're going to break that. We're going to fix that. So Godtear has a point scoring system turn by turn. Now, there are mission parameters. You win the mission by obtaining Godtears and doing certain things. And at the end of a the end of a round, whoever has the most points wins that round. And each round is worth different points. 1 point, 2 point, 3 points, 2 points, 1 point. You play over a set number of rounds. So this means you win round 1 and 2. I'm not out of the game. I really need to win round 3. I win round 3 and 4, I can come back. You start out strong in the beginning, round 1 and 2, and you're dominating. That doesn't mean the opponent's knocked out. That means they got to really pull the next couple of rounds. But you are never out of the game until the very end of the game. And this is exciting. So when you play Godtear, before we even get into the factions, this is a game that you're engaged turn by turn, and you can't be knocked out by the usual wargaming tricks. Alpha strikes, focus lists, metagaming, power gaming. I mean, look, there's powerful units and combos and synergies in the game, absolutely. But just that kind of math hammer, theory hammer, just play the meta, who cares? this game corrects that. So on those two things alone, I got very, very excited. Now let's talk about the missions themselves. You look at the board, and it's an interesting fusion. There's these tokens that are the literal tears of the gods, the crystals. And they're interesting because they're both an objective and terrain. This is where things got really creative. You look, and at the end of the game, at the end of a round, whoever controls the most tiers gets points. You also get points for killing champions and followers, and you also get points for different interactions. So there's a 3-track way to rack up points, or 4, depending on the warband. This doesn't just mean go out and kill. You can go out and kill a lot of stuff and get a lot of points, but if I control all the tiers, I'm going to win that round. If you go out and control all the tiers, you still got to kill stuff. You could come up with synergies and say, well, I'm going to take warbands that are going to deny my opponent the tiers, and I'll win on the kill. There's more than one way to win the round. But what's interesting is the tiers themselves, they radiate the awesome power of the gods for the most part. There's a few what-ifs, but for the most part, the followers can't cross over onto those tiers because they're just too powerful. So they become terrain that you can't move into. But the champions can. Now, in the missions, they're dynamic. What we'll see in a lot of wargaming missions is you'll fight over an objective. What's the objective? The ruin building, the ammo crate, the magic stone. Sometimes it's a terrain piece. Sometimes it's a token. It's kind of static. It just kind of hangs out there in a lot of legacy games. In Godtear, the tiers grow. They shrink. Depends on the mission. There's some missions where they grow. So at the end of the round, if you lost the round, you roll and you get to place a random number of new tiers next to each other. Life, they're literally growing. So now you say, well, look, do I block off followers and put up a wall of tiers to block my opponent off? Do I put them where my champions are and just plant banners and dig in? There's also games where the tiers shrink, where the tiers move, where they evolve. So it's an interesting duality of saying, hey, we're going to have these objectives that are also going to be terrain, that are also going to be changing every single turn. And the change is going to be based on player interaction and player input, so it's now a level of strategy. These three things, just the rules alone, stripping out the narrative and the models and everything, I was like, wow, this is an amazing system that's literally been built from the ground up. And it's exciting because you're never out. You play to the very end. You are never knocked out of the game. Now we jump in with the warbands. There are numerous warbands. Some are, I'm using terminology out of the game so it's easy to understand. Some are more fighting warbands. Some are more magic and support. They can cast curses. They can give boons and banes. They can give you more dice. Some warbands are more defensive, some more offensive, and you put all these together. But each warband with its champion and followers has tactics. And again, this is where the game scales. You can play one warband versus one and have a lot of interaction, a lot of strategy, and play a quick game. You can play 2 warbands versus 2 or 3. The game kind of wants to play 3-on-3. Now you get into awesome synergies where you're like, I'm going to have this warrior warband, and I'm going to have a caster throwing on buffs, and then I'm going to have another thing, area denial, and just come up with some crazy, crazy combos. And not overpowered, but really interesting. And can you tactically pull it off? The last piece. And in all fairness, now this is something that we're starting to see in newer wargaming systems and wargaming systems that are upgraded, even if they're part of a legacy aspect. But this idea that I want to see scalability. Battletech, as a side note, I play classic Battletech. Well, I don't think we call it classic anymore, but Battletech and Alpha Strike. Battletech, if you're unfamiliar, is a game of armored combat that can take a while to play. It's got a lot of detail. It could take a couple of hours. Alpha Strike is the streamlined version where you could play in an hour or two. I prefer classic Battletech, but I also recognize Alpha Strike is fun to play because there have been times where we've played a game of Battletech and we planned on 4 hours and it turned out it only took 3 hours. Well, we have an hour left before things close. We can't start another game of Battletech, but we can play Alpha Strike and fit it in. What I love about Godtear is it literally scales to the time that you have to play. So you could bring it and say, look, we only have an hour to play. We've had a main event. We played some other war games, and let's play some Godtear. Or maybe you played some big Godtear and you want to do it. You can do one-on-one. I can play about 2 games in an hour, one warband versus one warband. And that's just like really analyzing and getting into the narrative and thinking about it, not necessarily speed play. If you want some more complexity, you do 2 versus 2. The game really wants to play 3 versus 3, but it's not like if you play anything less than that, the rules don't synergize. Or it's like, well, the game wasn't meant to play at this, but you could. No, like it could play 1, 2, or 3. You can scale higher. Things get a little bit wacky and a little bit out of control. I like the bigger games. I've played them higher. But I appreciate the 1, 2, or 3 warband scale because I can go in and say, look, we've got a nice afternoon ahead of us of Godtear. We're going to play a couple of games 3-on-3. Get the factions out. Build your list. Who are you going to throw against me? But likewise, if I'm feeling it, I can get in a quick game. We can get in a quick game. It's very manageable and it scales. So from those perspectives alone, and that's just on the rule side, the production value of the models, fantastic. The sculpts, fantastic. The designs and the narratives, pulling in unique fantasy stuff and not just recycling like generic fantasy, looks amazing. Very, very intriguing. Very, very exciting with what they do. And the models themselves evoke and give you an idea of the powers and the abilities that they are able to do. So from that alone, I'm like, this is awesome. The rules are awesome. The community is awesome. The narrative is awesome. And now we're jumping in with miniatures, components that match, like, and if you love to paint them, I've got to start painting my Godtear miniatures. Like, Fritz, we're looking at this. Bro, they're not painted. They're not painted because all I'm doing is playing Godtear. I don't have time to paint them yet. Like, I got to like settle down for a little bit so I can paint these. But if you look online, YouTube and images and stuff, painted up, they look fantastic. It's crazy how awesome and how good they look. So that is my enthusiasm for Godtear. And, certainly if you're in the New York area, let's make this happen. But also to put out there, if you're looking for a new system, that scales and is fresh and very, very unique, that definitely has a future ahead of it with rules, campaigns, missions, and released models. I mean, we got 3 new factions this year, soon to be 4. The game has a lot ahead of it. And I would implore you to consider Godtear, adding it to your collection.